This is the Silicon Valley Executive Committee meeting on Friday, June 26th, and we are operating under rules for the COVID-19 executive order, and I think our clerk might want to make the whole official statement.
Yes, sure. So as Chair Miller mentioned, we'd just like to state for the record that this is being conducted by teleconference pursuant to the Brown Act waivers provided for under the Governor's executive order in response to the COVID-19 state of emergency. A few housekeeping items. Please mute your microphones, executive committee members, following roll call until it's your turn to speak, and please keep them muted. And to indicate you have a question or comment, please use the raise hand function in Zoom, and Chair Miller will announce you before you speak. Please also unraise your hand when you no longer have a question. A friendly reminder that all action items will need to be voted on by roll call vote. For members of the public joining us via teleconference, if you would like to speak during the public comment period, please use the raise hand function in Zoom. If you are joining us by telephone, you can also hit *9 and that will indicate that you would like to speak. If any board members or members of the public are experiencing technical difficulties during this meeting, please email me. My email address is on our agenda and I will do my best to resolve. With that, I will kick it over to our chair.
Okay, so we'll call this meeting to order and we'll go right back to the clerk for our roll call, please.
Thank you, Chair. Chair Miller?
Here.
Vice Chair Smith?
Here.
Gibbons?
Here.
Sinks?
Here.
Abekoga?
Here.
Thank you. All are present.
All right, next up is public comment on matters not listed on the agenda. Any member of the public may speak for up to 3 minutes. If you wish to speak, raise your virtual hand, or if you're called in on the phone, press *9. And we are going to start with Bruce.
Good morning, everybody. I wanted to speak on two related topics in this 3-minute block. The first is that I attended a teleconference or webinar put on by Sonoma Clean Power about building electrification, particularly home electrification. And in their introductory slide, they noted that people who are on their premier product are receiving renewable energy 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And for a moment, I wondered how they could make that claim. And then I realized that Sonoma Clean Power has geothermal energy in their mix. And so they can indeed peel off a portion of their geothermal as well as their solar and wind assets and offer that kind of premium product, the kind of product that ultimately all CCAs would like all of their customers to be able to receive. And so knowing that SVCE has some contracts upcoming for wind power, I wanted to put it in your mind that SVCE might want to offer that kind of power as its premium product. I don't really think having two kinds of premium products, one 24/7 and one just balanced on a yearly basis makes sense because it draws too much attention to the yearly balance issue. But I did think that Sonoma Clean Power had something to offer that I, as a customer, would like to have the opportunity to avail myself of. The second point relates to a comment that I made in the last face-to-face board meeting, where I talked about joining together with other CCAs and cities to fund PG&E's ability to charge a higher gas tax than electricity tax. I know at that meeting, alternate director Yulo suggested that that was something that he would personally like to have staff look into. I haven't heard back about that since then, and I'd like to make it clear that I think this is still a really good idea to increase demand for electricity, suppress demand for gas, and also for the cities that don't currently have a natural gas or electricity utility user tax, give them a new way to raise revenue that's climate friendly at the same time as being budget friendly. And those are my two comments. Thanks for the opportunity to share them with you.
Thanks, Bruce. Hey, before you go, one of the questions was whether PG&E had the system to charge two different taxes. Do you know if that's been resolved, or is that something for us to investigate?
They don't currently have the system, and they won't have the system until somewhere between $500,000 and $800,000 is spent on upgrading it. And that was the point of the appeal to the CCAs and the cities, was to pledge funds toward that particular upgrade. The city of Albany in the East Bay is apparently going to put on the ballot a measure that would charge a higher tax on large commercial gas accounts. But if they do that, then they will have to fund that, those software changes themselves. Perhaps that would lower the cost of future changes that don't differentiate based on commercial versus residential or the size of the gas bill. But that is an unknown, and it's of course unknown whether the residents of Albany will vote for the new tax.
Excellent. Thank you, Bruce. Always a wealth of information.
Thank you.
Liz, you have a comment?
I do, to Bruce's point. So I actually tried, our budget shortfall is significant, and we were looking for additional revenues, and the finance department recommended the UTT tax. And I said, well, it's fine, except we don't want to put it on electricity. And the comment back was, oh, but we do, because electricity use is going up and it will make us a lot more money. So just be aware that the dialogue and the education of council and staff needs to be paid attention to.
I get it. My new catchphrase to many people and many policy things they tell me is, if climate change was real and it really mattered, then you would be doing something different. All right, so anybody else from the public? Seeing none, we'll move along. We have the consent calendar, which has just minutes on it. Any discussion and or motion?
I'll move the consent calendar with the minutes.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second. Let me check with the public. Is there any member of the public that wishes to comment on this item? If so, please raise your virtual hand, or if you're on the phone, press *9. And I forgot, I should double check with the clerk. Have we received any other public input on this?
No public comment received.
Is there any final comment from any board member? Seeing none, if we could get a roll call vote, please.
Thank you. Chair Miller,
Aye.
Chair Smith,
Yes.
Gibbons,
Yes.
Sinks,
Aye.
Abekoga,
Aye.
thank you. That motion carries unanimously.
All right, next up, regular calendar. We're going to start with item 2, which is our CEO report or update.
Thank you, Chair Miller, members of the Executive Committee. I have a few items to update you on. First, I'll start with our strategic plan update. We worked with the member agency working group yesterday, presented the overall update schedule and the different risks and opportunities from a big picture SVCE standpoint. And then we went through about 25 to 30 minutes of an interactive session to actually get input from them as to what they would like to see SVCE work with cities for the next 3 to 5 years. So we've collected that information, and the idea that was brought up by Bruce Carney was also teed up there. So we will put that on our work plan to look into as to how much, it's on the list, I should say. So just acknowledge that. Second item is I'd like to update you on long duration storage. As you know, the integrated resource plan requirements for all load serving entities in California now requires all of us to be engaged in procuring long duration storage by the year 2026. This issue has come up in the last legislative cycle too, in terms of pumped hydro. We have 13 CCAs that have issued a joint RFI for long duration storage. The results should be available on July 1. 8 CCAs, a subset of them, are looking at how we can create an organization that could transact for these kinds of very large resources. So we're in the process of creating a super JPA, of going through that process. So we've hired a legal team and someone who's actually been in the public power space for more than 3 decades to help us HCCAs through that. So I'll keep you updated on it. I believe we'll have something to the board somewhere in the September, October timeframe. PG&E bankruptcy, you should be seeing the news. They will be coming out of bankruptcy in the next few days. But the corollary is in Sacramento, we have SB 350, which is the backup plan, so to speak, to PG&E coming out of bankruptcy. And if they go bankrupt again, SB 350 would create a new public entity called Golden State Energy that would be engaged in basically taking over the assets of PG&E. There's $50 million that's been set aside in the proposed budget from the governor as startup costs for Golden State Energy. So expect to see some press on them coming out of bankruptcy and the governor's viewpoints and various other people's opinions in the next week. And we'll keep you updated by email as we get information. My last item is I would like to introduce, in response to Don Eckert leaving to take on the CEO role at Pioneer Community Energy, I got in touch with management partners, and we have an interim CFO who will be starting officially on July 15th, but he is on this call right now. And I want to introduce him. His name is Don Rhodes, and he has 29 years of public sector experience. He has a CPA license, and he served as the finance director for the city of Monterey, and also as the chief financial officer for the city of Beverly Hills. So he's been involved in most facets of municipal financing, including operational and capital budgeting, strategic financial planning, accounting and financial reporting, capital improvement planning. So everything that we would need for on an interim basis, he's going to help us with. Don Eckert, Kevin, Don, myself, we've been working on a transition plan focusing on the budget, work with the credit rating agencies, and the treasurer's report. So so far the transition's going quite smoothly, and I'll see if Don can, if he's on the line and can speak up just to introduce himself for a minute. That'll be great.
Okay.
Hey, Don, before you start, do you want to be
Good
promoted?
morning. I just unmuted, so I hope you can hear me.
Don, we can hear you. The question
Okay.
is, do you want to be promoted to a panelist so we can see you too?
Sure, that'd be fine.
That might be good. Let me do that. It'll pause for a second, so hang in there. Okay, somebody's got you behind my back. That's good.
And so Don, you are now muted again. So you'd need to unmute and turn on your video. There you go.
Okay, there we are. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Girish, for that introduction. I'm, as Girish said, I have a good amount of experience working with municipal finance departments over the years, so this is a bit of a new twist for me. A lot of skill sets, of course, will transfer across the kinds of things that a JPA does are similar in the accounting world, but there are new terms and a lot of new types of things that I'm coming up to speed with, and working with Don Eckert, the other Don, and Kevin as well. So I'm really looking forward to working with you. I think you've got a fantastic agency there, and you're doing some amazing things. So this is really exciting for me. Thank you very much.
We're glad that you've chose to join us, and there's something about the name Don that seems to work really well in our organization.
Yep.
So
That was,
well,
Yes.
welcome,
Yes,
and thank you for taking on our challenge.
You bet. Look forward to it.
yeah. And Don will be on this call as Don Eckert will be presenting on item 5, which is the budget framework. With that, Chair Miller, that's the end of my report. Thank you.
Okay, we have one member of the public who wishes to speak. If there's anybody else, please raise your virtual hand. And the one hand that's up right now is Tony's. We're going to start with Tony. What do you got?
You guys hear me okay?
Yeah, you're a little soft, but we hear you.
Okay. Howard, you beat me to the Don joke, but that wasn't why I raised my hand. I had a question for Girish. Is if, or maybe it's when, PG&E declares bankruptcy again, and Golden State Power is, if I remember the name correctly, is in place, are they potentially now another competitor of ours, or adversary, if you will, that now has the backing of the state government that we'll have to deal with?
No, I don't think so, Tony. I think we have 170 cities that are CCA cities, serving more than 10 million Californians. We are too big to be subsumed or even be competition. So there have been discussions with the governor's office to make sure that any entity in the bill, I believe, and I'll follow up later on the exact wording, but any entity that has a CCA will continue to be served by a CCA.
I'm just wondering if now the things like the central buyer issue and stuff, the state will be conflicted as opposed to just at least somewhat neutral. That's the end of my question. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Let me check with the clerk. Was there any other member of the public who wished to comment on this item?
No additional comments received.
Any comments from any of the members of the board? Seeing none, we're now going to skip around in the agenda slightly. We're going to take item 4, Amy.
Great. Good morning. Are you able to hear me okay?
Perfectly.
Great. Perfect. Thank you. Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak and also for the agenda rearrangement. I really appreciate it. This is going to be a brief informational update. Next slide, please, Andrea. Specifically on SVCE's Building Decarb Joint Action Plan. We really just wanted to make sure that you were aware that this is in progress and that we're incorporating any input and suggestions you have at this stage. Next slide. So by way of background, the board approved the development of a Building Decarb Joint Action Plan in February of this year. And the purpose is really to develop a comprehensive building decarbonization strategy and plan to establish both SVCEs and also member agency priorities, policies, and program concepts, and our approach. Next slide, please. So to put it in context, as you all know, we have the decarb strategy and programs roadmap, and that document sets our longer term GHG goals and also covers our overarching approach to achieving decarbonization, touching on all parts of this Venn diagram. Next slide. Thank you. And then we have some sector specific plans. So on the power supply side, as you know, we have an integrated resource plan that's carried out every 2 years. We're just finishing up the latest one. For mobility, we have the Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Joint Action Plan, which was carried out last year and adopted by the board in fall of 2019. And the Building Decarb Joint Action Plan covers the built environment. And so completing the 3 sectors of our Venn diagram. Next slide, please. So for the Building Decarb Plan, we contracted with Integral Group back in March. And this is a local firm with very deep expertise in making high performance buildings cost effective at scale, as well as, excuse me, comprehensive building decarbonization action planning. And we've been focused mainly on these activities, which are specifically background research and analysis, stakeholder surveys, virtual workshops, and one-on-one interviews. And so We've carried out a lot of work in the last couple months to develop a draft plan. We're in the process of reviewing an initial draft, and we hope to release that to our member agencies and other stakeholders in early July, and then carry out the next phase of stakeholder engagement. Next slide, please. And so one part of the analysis that was carried out was specifically looking at our building stock and carrying out a data-driven assessment of our building stock and energy and emissions associated with our buildings. And so this is just one highlight actually from that analysis, which we've called the Buildings Baseline study. So we wanted to share this one. It quickly became kind of a staff favorite chart. The units, I apologize, I forgot to write the units on this chart. It's metric tons of CO2. And so what this is a so-called Sankey diagram of emissions. And on the left-hand side, it specifies the source. And this is as measured at the meter. Then towards the middle, you can see how emissions are divided up by sector. Residential and commercial, and then further disaggregated by specific building types. And then on the very right-hand side is specifically emissions by end use. And so you can see that the majority of the emissions in our buildings are from natural gas. Commercial and residential building stock in our service territory contribute roughly equally, and it's largely space and water heating that are responsible for it. Next slide, please. So that was just a brief highlight of the Buildings Baseline study, and the full study will be released in mid-July with the draft plan as well, since that analysis has been used or is being used to inform the development of that plan. So just by way of next steps, really in July is when we'll release a draft plan and carry out that next phase of stakeholder engagement of review and revisions of that plan. We'll provide an update to the executive committee likely in August. And then we are anticipating bringing the plan and a budget request for implementation of the plan to the board at the September meeting. And then after the determination is made of whether it's adopted, then we begin implementation. Of course, this timeline is a bit dependent on the pace and outcomes of stakeholder engagement. You know, one thing that we've certainly realized from the first phase of stakeholder engagement, given municipal staff kind of demands on their time, we needed to kind of extend the timeline a bit to make sure that we were getting feedback from multiple city departments, given there have been a lot of competing priorities for sure in the last few months. And so this may be shifted out a little bit, but this is our target timeline at this point in time. So that's the informational update we wanted to share. I'm happy to take any questions or any comments. Thank you.
All right, anybody have any questions? So let's start with Liz. Go ahead.
So are we going to do questions and discussion all at the same time?
Yeah, I do have to let the public in at some point, but go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to be my usual broken record. I need to comment that some of the groups that are listed in the presentation don't include architects, general contractors, and specification writers, and people that are in the day-to-day building. And I'm always concerned about that. I think that we have to be really engaging a broad range of people in these discussions. And the other is that I've sent a link, I mentioned at the board meeting last month, or this month, that the Boston Society of Architects is doing a program on decarbonization of building. And it's very interesting, and I think it really is worthwhile. You can just look at all, there's been 4 so far, and the links I've sent allow you to watch all 4 of them. Talk about the absolute life cycle of carbon in buildings, including construction, and the portion of which the built environment of operations, which is what we're talking about, is very, very little compared to the total carbon footprint of buildings from material perspective as well as from operating perspectives. So I don't want to necessarily say we need to go outside of our frame of reference right now in terms of what we're going to be producing, but I think it's really important to understand the conversation is much broader than just how buildings operate. So I just encourage us to keep our eyes and ears open on a different perspective and make sure we get a lot of important, relevant groups engaged.
Excellent. Rod?
Thank you very much. I was looking at well, I was interested in the answer to Liz's question and looking at the people you were engaged with. Aren't some of them architects?
Yes, some of them are, but I'd also just mention our selection of integral group was really an acknowledgement of the fact that you know, we, as Director Gibbons pointed out, we of course need to engage a really broad range of folks, including specifically folks involved in the day-to-day. And integral group, at least in the RFP process, was unique in that they have both a kind of development shop with architects and specification writers, general contractors. Actually, the main PM on this project is an architect herself, in addition to this other shop that's more focused on policy and plan development. And so Integral Group itself has been incorporating a lot of that perspective, but then also looping in specifically contractors and architects within the community through the process. And so there are some that have participated in the mini workshops shown on the appendix slide. But I did, want to highlight that Integral Group is providing a lot of that perspective as well.
And Peter Turnbull, is that an architectural firm also, or is that, do they do something else? I see EHDD and Turnbull.
Right. So EHDD is one of the main ones. Peter Turnbull is a former 30-year veteran at PG&E who had been focused on zero net energy design. So he isn't himself an architect, but is very steeped in low carbon. Yeah.
And then also from the appendix, what does Reach Codes 2.0 mean? It shows up high on the list of
Yeah, so Reach
results.
Codes, so Reach Codes 2.0 in this case is referring to a variety of different advancements from kind of our current Reach Code effort. Some of it's more just working with cities to look at, is there standardization across the region that might be beneficial? I mean, we've adopted a variety of different Reach Codes our cities have, and which is great. It's a petri dish of a lot of different opportunities. But I'm guessing all of our cities are going to be learning a lot and sharing kind of what's working, what's not working. And so some of it may be some kind of correction, if you will, of existing policy. But the expansion part of it really covers, okay, if it focuses on new constructions, we could expand to include major remodels, for instance. And so a lot of them that have been adopted haven't necessarily included a couple of the trigger points for development. Also on the table is looking at a storage mandate. That was something that some stakeholders were very interested in, or looking at exploring other building types, other sectors beyond the Reach Codes that have already been adopted, which have been focused on specific sectors. And so it's fairly broad, but it's intended to be kind of the second wave of effort that incorporates a variety of different improvements.
Which could include electrification of existing buildings. I mean, I noted on your Sankey diagram that so much of the gas is consumed for, what about, of the large amounts, space heating and water heating are comparable and by far the biggest. Yeah. And on the Sankey diagram, I'm happy to see it come full circle. I've used them recently at startup companies when we were trying to talk about the budget and where we were spending our money. I introduced them to my city, and now it's a popular chart there. And we have it. I also introduced it at the Air District, but actually it was created, according to Wikipedia, in 1898 as a classic figure showing the energy efficiency of a steam engine. So I'm glad to see that it's come full circle, and we're now talking about how we reduce energy by segmenting things. I love that diagram. Thank you.
So Rod, I'll just say in Saratoga, you know, if it's more than if it's a 50% remodel, the REACH codes apply. So Cupertino could catch up on the REACH code 2.0 thing. Liz, did you have a quick additional comment? And then I'm going to go to Nancy.
Good on you, Howard.
Well, I want to make sure that I'm understanding the process of the workshops then. Are these selected groups of people not open to discuss? I'm not sure I'm following what the workshops are and what they're intending to do.
Sure. So the stakeholder engagement plan that we have is multiple phases, but the phase that was already carried out, I believe in last month in May, that's reflected here on this chart of attendees, we organized 3 mini workshops. One of them was focused on policy that a municipal agency might be able to adopt. And so this was primarily, as you can see from the attendee list, working with our city staff. And so we had a 2-hour workshop talking with them about different policy options that could be incorporated into this joint action plan. And then there are a variety of expert stakeholders that participated as well. The second workshop was focused more on potential SVCE-led activities, and so a bit more on the incentive side or other ways that we could support the member agencies. And then the third one included both member agency-led and SVCE-led programs, and was trying to catch a variety of additional stakeholders. And so these were concentrated mini workshops to get some initial stakeholder input from our stakeholders within the community and specifically experts. But we've also carried out surveys to a broader group of folks and carried out one-on-one interviews specifically with folks that either couldn't participate in this set of workshops or that we knew we needed additional feedback from. The second wave of stakeholder engagement will include a broader kind of public webinar as well as more targeted stakeholder engagement to key groups.
Thank you. I'll probably talk with you more about it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you, Nancy, for letting me put Liz back in there. Nancy?
Sure. I have actually a follow-up question for Director Gibbons. You mentioned that you had sent an email with links in it. Who did you send that to? And was it provided to the rest of the executive committee or to the board?
I actually sent it just to staff, but I'm thinking I will now ask staff to send it to everybody. It's absolutely fascinating. So
yeah, I would, I have the opportunity to work with some young advocates who are interested in clean energy and especially building decarb. So I would like to provide that information as very relevant to their work. So
yeah,
thank you.
You're welcome.
And thank you to Amy. Again, I will just say that the Sankey chart is great, and I've been working to introduce it at Caltrain. So thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Nancy. Okay, let me go to the public real quick, and then we'll come back for any final comments. Okay, is there any member of the public that wishes to comment on this item? If so, please raise your virtual hand. If you're on the phone, press *9. I am seeing none. So I will ask the clerk. You moved on my screen. Did anybody else? Okay, nothing from the alternate channel. Are there any other final comments that anybody wishes to make? Everybody's made great comments, so I'll just say, Amy, keep going. We're trying to change the world, and what you're doing with the decarb plan is really important. So thank you for all that you're doing. And for the other cities, come on, you guys can do large remodels already. So, okay, so that's what we got on this one. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to go back into order. We're going to come up item 3, messaging and the eHub update.
All right. Thank you, Chair Miller, and good morning, directors. Over the next few weeks, we're going to be incorporating a lot of new content and resources into our website, as well as some updated messaging. And we wanted to give you all an advanced look. We wanted to get your reactions and your questions, maybe your advice about how we can roll this out to the rest of the board in the August-September timeframe. You see references here to the eHub. The eHub is what was formerly known as the Online Customer Resource Center. After a lot of work, we came up with this shorthand term. E, think electrification, think education, think online or electronic. Hub, think center, where you go to be in middle of the action. So eHub, shorthand for Online Customer Resource Center. We're going to briefly review, next slide please, briefly review background, how we got here. We're going to preview our updated homepage and the eHub site and associated web pages. We'll talk about the eHub tools and some new creative and marketing assets that we're going to use to message the eHub in the coming months. And we'll talk about, excuse me, timeline for rollout. Next slide, please. I will also mention that presenting with me here this morning are Pam Leonard. Of course, you all remember Pam. She recently rejoined us after giving birth to Autumn, her new daughter. So we're delighted to have Pam back. And we're also joined by Beth Trenchard, who I'm not sure many of you have met, but Beth is on contract with us. She filled in behind Pam beginning in January, and she's a veteran of the CCA space. She worked for a couple of years in leading programs with MVCP. Family circumstances brought her back in our direction, and we were very fortunate to recruit her in the December timeframe to join us on an interim basis to fill in behind Pam to help build out the eHub. So we've been delighted to have Beth with us in that context. Over the past year or so, we've been working to evolve our messaging in general. When we first launched SVCE, of course, our messaging was principally about SVCE, who we were, the basics of our value proposition, clean energy at a competitive rate. But more recently, we've been broadening that messaging in the direction of electrification and decarbonization, and really looking to incorporate the customer into that messaging to empower our customers. And this is really important because so many of our surveys, going all the way back to our start, have indicated that our customers really care about climate. They're concerned. They don't necessarily know what to do. And even if they do know what to do, they don't necessarily know how to go about doing it. So what we're working to put in place here with our new messaging and our new resources are really meant to help address this big need that's out there. Next slide, please. So this is our new updated homepage, and as you can see, the message is intended to be inspirational, and it's intended to be about our customer. Your power can change the world with clean energy from SVCE. You have the power to make all electric lifestyle choices that eliminate emissions, save money, and build a cleaner, greener Silicon Valley for all of us. In the live version of this, and we've refrained from doing a live demo this morning, although we could go there if we wanted to at the end. The windmills actually turn. This is a very ethereal and beautiful image shot from the Altamont area back in towards Silicon Valley. It definitely kind of connotes this feeling of the power of nature. When you drop down below this page and scroll down, there's an introduction to the eHub, and then information that has always been on our homepage about how CCAs work, SVCE, your energy choices with us, Green Start, Green Prime, SVCE's impact to date in the community, and of course, news items. So a lot of the traditional homepage content just lower on this new page. Next page, please. So in terms of how we got to be here, as you know, this notion of an online customer resource center came out of the work that we did with the Customer Program Advisory Group back in 2018. And then the program was defined and approved as part of the decarb plan at the end of that year. We spent a lot of time last year going through an RFI process and an RFP process. The goal being to really build a site that inspires, educates, and helps enable action around electrification and decarbonization for our 250,000 residential customers. And what we've built out now is very much a V1.0. It's a framework, and it has a lot of initial content in it and tools. But I think you'll see that there's a real frame here to continue to build on over time, to link programs into, to link additional content into and resources. So I think this is maybe the most exciting part about this, is it's really the start of something that should continue to grow over time. We put together a really strong team and a big team when you look at all the players involved. So our website and creative work has been led by School of Thought. They've also worked with the Building Decarbonization Commission at a state level and have brought some really creative thinking to this. Our three platform vendors, ZappyRide, PickMySolar, and Energy, are providing tools that our customers can use. Website development was done by Creative F5. They've been our website developer all along. And then program management from SVCE, led by Beth most recently, but Pam before that, and now rejoining. And also we've gotten some assistance from SMUD. As you know, SMUD has done some very interesting work in this area with marketplaces and the like, and we've been learning a lot from them and getting some help over the shoulder as we've gone through this. Next slide, please. So before we dive into some of the page images, I want to give you a little bit of a map of where we're going. So we've talked about the home page. When we get into the eHub portion of the website, there are three main segments: a clean electricity segment, a drive electric segment, and an electric at home segment. Under clean electricity, if we want to advance the slide here, I think we can populate there we go. Why don't we click the next two as well? So under the clean electricity segment, we talk about Green Start, the ability to add Green Prime, and then solar plus storage options that customers have, and some general education around that. And then that leads to the PickMySolar site, which is the third-party vendor that we've contracted for to provide a concierge service for quoting and installation of solar and storage. In the drive electric segment, education on EVs, and then a tool that provides a full catalog of available EVs, available incentives, where you can find charging, how you can put charging in at home, and the like. Electric at home is a ton of information on options for electrifying different aspects of your home, beginning with a smart thermostat through major appliances like heat pump water heaters, heat pump HVAC, think electric dryers, induction stovetops, all the way down to energy efficient lighting and other efficiency approaches that you can take. The main platform tool in this segment of the site is Energy, which is our appliance marketplace. So you can actually shop for a lot of these products through that site and do comparisons, understand relative efficiency and the like. So this is the basic architecture of our new and improved website and of the eHub. Next page, please. So with this, I'm going to turn it over to Beth, and Beth is going to take us through some of the example pages and content here of the eHub.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you about eHub. It's a pretty exciting project. The image that you're looking at here is the eHub landing page. The design and structure of eHub really reflects the data that we captured in the very beginning of December and January. We captured really thorough in-person, in-depth interviews with a group of customers that presented a pretty good cross-section of those who would be most likely to use the eHub. And what we learned from those interviews is that customers want to do the right thing. They want to reduce emissions. They want to be part of the solution, but they really don't know what that looks like. They want to be told what actions they should take and why. They want easy to understand words. Clean energy, pollution, all resonate, but CO2, not so much. Keep it simple. Customers don't know where they can get information that they can trust. Customers don't want to spend a lot of time pulling together information or research. They want everything in one place. And customers want direction and information from a trusted source. Silicon Valley Clean Energy is definitely perceived as a transparent, trusted source. So great validation that eHub will be valuable for customers, but also really instructive around designing the layout for eHub. The goal is to have really intuitive, easy to use design and structure that provides access to a lot of information for those who want it, but also doesn't overwhelm those that want something more streamlined. So really easy to navigate. The designers and customers found that the future fit home concept is really very intuitive, relatable. It quickly demonstrates all of the choices that a customer could make to switch from fossil fuels to electric home appliances, or home charging the EV, or perhaps producing and storing your own clean energy. So keep in mind, as Don pointed out, the eHub structure is almost like a funnel. It starts at the top with inspiring messaging, and then slowly works down to really educating around why clean electricity, driving electric, or electric at home matters. And then actually further gets into detail around why is a heat pump water heater, for example, important. And then ultimately, when you get to these third-party tools, Energy, Pick My Solar, or Zappy Ride, almost product-specific detail, like why would you consider an A.O. Smith heat pump water heater versus a Reed? So that's the structure. If you could advance the slide. So again, that future fit home was at the top, and there were 3 categories below it. If the customer were to click on that clean electricity start now button, this is what they would go through. You would, again, starting at the top, very inspiring, and then becomes much more educational and more specific. On this clean electricity page, the customer is going to learn about why clean energy matters, Green Start, the opportunity to upgrade to Green Prime, and to learn more about solar and batteries. Next slide. From that very top, you can actually work down to the Pick My Solar site. This is the solar assistant, which is for customers who are looking at solar and battery. There's another page. It's also a battery assistant, which is really focused for those customers who already have solar and are considering adding a battery. Rather than try and describe the Pick My Solar experience, it's a concierge service that really walks you through the process. I'm just going to share with you my experience. As part of the user testing to integrate this tool onto the Silicon Valley Clean Energy site, I really just wanted to go through the customer experience to see what it felt like. In my case, I have a very old solar system. It was one of the original ones. It's maxed out. I've got a inverter that's about to go off warranty. I have I've been highly impacted by the PG&E outages, so I definitely want backup. And I know that my electricity usage is going to increase tenfold. I also want a Highland, and I want a battery backup to take advantage of all the S-chip incentives. So I'm a pretty difficult, if you will, customer. I wanted a lot of different information. Based on my first call with Pick My Solar, what really struck me is they established themselves as a consultant. They are an objective consultant that will work with you to kind of navigate through all of the different options and various different bids that they'll gather for you. So what I learned in my very first phone call, she came up with different options. She told me what I should consider when I look at islanding, estimates for the increased usage. Great job speaking to the uncertainties of some of the incentive programs and how to work around that. Quickly identified I was in a tier 3 fire zone, and shared what next steps and expectations were. Truly, I can't emphasize enough. I was so impressed. It was an extremely professional experience where truly I felt like I had this fabulous objective person that was walking me through the process. I think customers are really going to benefit a lot from this program. I'm going to move on to the next slide, which is Drive Electric. Again, if you'll recall that top landing page had the future fit home and below it 3 categories. The first one was clean electricity. Now I'm going to walk you through the Drive Electric category. In Drive Electric, you're going to learn a lot about EVs as well as charging. And as you get to the Zappy Ride tool or EV incentive, the incredible tool with all of the incentives in one place. If you could go to the next slide. Thank you. The Zappy Ride tool, again, another fabulous tool. It really takes all of the different models. Again, this is in one place. All of the different models, it compares price points, range, and all of the available tools, incentives. So imagine you're a customer who's perhaps curious about EVs, or maybe you have some old ideas or they don't have enough range or they're too expensive. In the Zappy Ride tool, you can compare 3 different vehicles on multiple variables, whether it's the incentives available, MSRP, range, time to charge, cost of ownership. It's all in one place and very easy to use. It's really valuable for those customers who are trying to learn and understand more about EVs, but it also has tools that are pretty valuable for sophisticated EV users. One of the things that was really emphasized as we spoke to several of the jurisdictions is the value of having in one place all possible incentives that you could qualify for based on your income level is really beneficial. And it's for anybody who's purchased an EV, it is not an easy thing to come by. So again, another fabulous tool. Next slide. And then the third category was the electric at home page. Here, the customers are going to learn about the value and benefits of home appliances and why electrifying appliances matters. There's a lot of great educational content on eHub for smart thermostats, heat pump water heaters, HVAC, induction cooking, dryers, and lighting and efficiency. If you could go to the next slide. What you're seeing on the left here is if you were on the electric at home page and you just scroll down, you would see one of these pages for each of those products I mentioned. In this case, it's the heat pump water heater. And you'll see this illustration, which ties back to the Future Fit Home. And the description is really how the technology works. But if you'd like more information, and if you could just click that, Andrea, for the next pop-up. If you were on this page and you happen to click that link that says the basics, heat pump water heater, this would pop up. And think of this as, I'll call it the clip notes for heat pump water heater. It's a very quick summary of the things that you really should consider when thinking about installing a heat pump water heater. If you want even more information on the eHub, you could click, in this case, Buyer's Guide, and you would have even more information around the things that you might want to consider before installing a heat pump water heater. And then, assuming you're interested even more, you would click on the button that says Appliances Assistant, and that would take you to the Energy site where you could then compare And what I consider kind of a consumer reports-like site where you can look at customer reviews, you can compare efficiencies, look at price points between various different types of heat pump water heaters. It's a great product. And you can then go a little further and seek out price points at various different retailers. So that's kind of a general layout of eHub. I know I went very quickly, but there you have it.
All right. Is that the conclusion for all the stuff we were covering under this category?
We have one more. Can we advance it another slide or so?
Perfect. Yes. Okay, there we go.
Okay, Pam,
Yes.
on engagement.
Yeah, so the eHub is our first opportunity to run an outreach campaign on a mass scale where we can engage all of our customer segments. So I think that's a really exciting opportunity that we've been looking forward to for a while now. And in order to break through the noise and get people's attention, we know already that energy is not something that's top of mind for our customers. So that's why we brought on School of Thought as our creative agency. And this is going to help us craft our messaging that we can use across a variety of platforms to deploy an integrated marketing campaign that'll drive traffic to the eHub, as well as the other third-party tools and other programs. And in addition to the traditional advertising mediums that we would be taking advantage of, one of the biggest opportunities we have is to leverage our customer emails. We have emails for a significant portion of our customers, and utilizing the data analytics platform that the programs team has been developing, we can really tailor and customize messages to our customers' usage and their interests around EVs, solar, other home electrification technologies. And this is also going to give us an opportunity to work with our member communities, which is something we're exploring to cross-promote to, targeting citywide perhaps around EV education and awareness or other programs that align with their climate action initiatives. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Don, who's going to share some of these creative examples.
So we'll spin through the last few slides here pretty quickly, but these are examples of the messaging that School of Thought has worked with us on, and we did a few iterations of these and really settled on this notion of myth busting, or putting in the message something that maybe challenges the way people have traditionally thought. So the example here would be that people think clean energy costs more, but that isn't necessarily true anymore. So again, looking to change people's perspectives and draw them towards SV clean energy. So you can see you can't put a price on saving the climate, but it doesn't hurt when clean energy costs less. Your power can change the world, start saving at, and it directs you to the eHub. So that's an example. I won't provide any narration of the following examples. We'll just spin through them here to give you a sense for them. We have probably 20 or 25 of these. We're just showing you a handful in the interest of time. So Andrea, if we can just dwell on each of these for a moment. Okay, so we're pretty much at the end of our prepared comments here. The timeline here shows the development process over the last 6 months. We are looking to quote unquote soft launch over the next week or two here, which basically means turn it on And then in the second half of this year, we're really going to start driving traffic to the site. When we turn it on, it will work. And it needs to work both on a desktop format and in a mobile format. And that's really kind of where we are right at this moment. It's working pretty well in desktop. We've got a few kinks to sort out in the mobile version. But we'll get the thing turned on. Traffic will start to come to the site. We can do some digital advertising, which will begin to bring traffic. And then when we really start doing our email campaigns is when we'll see traffic really begin to move through this site. So that's it. We're very interested in your reactions, questions, and maybe thoughts on how we can continue to roll this out to the rest of the board.
All right, we have one member of the public, but are there any questions from the board first? Go ahead, Nancy.
I'm well blown away. I mean, it looks fabulous. So great job. And you know, I watched every episode of Mad Men at least once. So, you know, of course I know all about advertising. No, I don't really, but I was just wondering if you've done any focus groups or anything to decide how the response is to the, you know, myth busting approach.
So I'll jump in with comments, and then Beth or Pam, if you wanted to join in. So as Beth mentioned, we did one-on-one interviews, you know, 30-minute interviews with a select group of customers, and it was 12 or 15 customers that were picked to represent different segments. And that was really educational. Again, that was more them telling us stuff than us necessarily testing messages on them. This notion around myth busting is also something that's being worked on at the Building Decarbonization Coalition or at a statewide level. It is a proven approach for engagement or for getting people to think. So I think at that level, there's been maybe some vetting of this. Relative to these specific ads, nope, we haven't trotted these out yet. We have a whole drawer full of them, and we're going to have the opportunity to see how they perform when we get them out there in a digital context. What produces click-throughs and which ones don't. So I think that's part of what we're going to be learning as it relates to some of the very specific messages themselves. Pam or Beth?
Okay.
That got it, Nancy?
Well, no, he was referring to Beth and Pamela if they had anything to add. But I do have a close-up comment on this. So, yeah, so I was talking with James Talea recently, and I let slip the term, we're cooking with gas, and I got an earful about that. So I think that the, you know, historically, something like we're cooking with gas is really sticky. And I think clean energy needs something equally pithy and sticky, and I think it'll evolve the messaging about clean energy. So I would just say keep at it.
Your comment about cooking with gas is funny because in various iterations of this messaging, we played around with a lot of common expressions from back in the day. And what we were learning was that many of those messages meant nothing to younger people. I'm trying to think of some examples. Oh, we had one of the EV ads that referred to a lemon, you know, and yeah, anyone under 35, painting with a broad brush, had no idea what a lemon was. or just it isn't a term that younger people are as familiar with. So yeah, we really I think that's going to be one of the tricks as we go through this. Certain messages are going to work more broadly, and some we're going to foul out because it's just too specific. But yeah, cooking with gas is a good example. I've always loved that expression, but I'm not sure that.
Don't use it around James Talea.
Yeah,
You'll,
okay, all
you'll
right.
get it.
All right.
And I only recently thought of it because I'm reading this book on fiber. And it was used as an example of how actually the all-electric model was prevalent before the gas companies came along with the "you're cooking with gas" motto, and completely undermined. We could have been all electric all along, but that's not what happened. So
Well, in the 30s, they didn't have induction cooktops yet.
Yeah, they didn't. That's right. Yeah.
You know.
So, you know, I think it is a tipping point where it is cost effective, and the myth busting is a good approach for now. But I think it's just, you know, keep working on it. It'll be good.
Yeah, good.
We need our real cooks use electric, but that's okay. Let me go to Bruce from the public, and then I'll come back to the board. Bruce?
Hello there. Yes, it's the bee's knees. So I have three comment areas I wanted to weigh in on. I like the visual identity that SVCE has established and is continuing with this batch of creative. But I have several things I'd like the board to think about. One is, what are your success metrics other than click-throughs? I know in an earlier executive committee meeting, there was some details about SMUD's essentially online store where they were selling smart thermostats and other things. And there were a lot of, you know, there was information on the dollar value of flow, but they were very low priced items, which may be a good thing, but I would encourage you to try to understand, how can you tell whether this website is leveraged solar or storage or EVs or heat pump water heaters. It isn't a marketing campaign until you sell something, or it isn't a successful marketing campaign until you sell something. The other thing I would ask is, from a financial perspective for SVCE as a business, do you really want homeowners installing more solar? Or do you want them installing more solar plus storage? I believe that SVCE loses money on every new solar system that's installed. Frankly, you lose money on existing solar as well, because you're paying at full retail when in fact you could be buying the same energy at a few pennies per kilowatt hour, or even being paid to take it in the middle of the day. And if you are in fact making money when someone buys an EV and losing money when somebody buys solar, then I would think that the leftmost column in your chart would be EVs, how to get them, why they're good, and you would to some degree suppress the notion of solar, or maybe solar plus storage is a good thing for SVCE, in which case you'd want to differentiate that. And then the third thing is that this is a very homeowner, single family home centric mental model, right? So if you live in a condo, even if you own it, you have different options and fewer options than somebody who lives in a single family home. If you're a renter, you have even fewer options. And if you're a landlord, I'm not sure that this speaks to you at all. So I would encourage you to think about a segmentation where you identify whether the person on your site is a homeowner, a renter, or a landlord, and possibly also whether they're living in a single family home or a multifamily building. Because based on that, there are different buckets of information that are relevant. And carry on and keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Any other member of the public wish to comment on this item? Check with our clerk. Did we get any alternate communications?
No additional comments.
Okay, come back to the board. Rod?
Thank you. I've been talking to a few of the advocates in the community, and one thing I'm looking forward to that I would love to add to this is, and that I think would really be inspiring to have people take action to do solar plus storage. I mean, I get the point that, yeah, we like grid scale solar and it's good for our agency, but the idea that Steve Schmidt and others propose is that we are very close to a vehicle to grid solution. That is that, you know, if we have a lot of people worried about PSPS events and their ability to maintain their household, we're all quarantining now. And what happens when we have a PSPS event? Suddenly our power is disrupted, we can't work anymore, we can't communicate. Well, it turns out that a typical EV has plenty of power for a household to do most of what it needs to do for days. So this idea of a vehicle to grid solution would, I think, be very exciting to customers and give them a better reason to adopt a solar plus storage solution than anything to date. And you know, if the inclination is to go out and just get that Honda gasoline generator, or for a business to go out and get a diesel generator, which requires a lot of permitting and other stuff, the commercial one does, right? We from a climate perspective and also from a air quality perspective, we would all be better off if we could figure out how to aid and abet the market for these vehicle to grid solutions, because I think it's the one really compelling argument in a time when people are during this fire season, you can bet it's going to happen again, very worried about power shutoffs and disruption of our livelihoods and our lives otherwise. Thanks. I appreciate all the work. It looks really cool, and yeah, I'm excited about this rollout. So thank you all for your hard work.
Hey, Rod, before you go, vehicle to grid. You know, Tesla had some noise in, I don't know, April or May or something pretty recently, but as far as I know, there aren't any cars yet that do this. Or can I go to this fancy tool?
Well, so maybe this is my opportunity to request that we look into this. Steve Schmidt, who was on our board for a couple of years, has been arguing this point in the Stanford Energy Professionals discussion, and advocates, including Diane Bailey and others who I've spoken to recently, think this is the killer app, if you will, for, if I can use an old expression. This is the killer app for solar plus storage. You know, if it's a wonky and hard argument to say you need a battery because of time shifting and blah blah blah, this idea that you could have all the power you need, and maybe that battery is in fact your car. It's a thing that you have anyway, and so I think there are things that need to be looked into. What are the warranties like on this? But honestly, right, if I drain car, it would be worth it to me to have a big backup power source that lasted for days, like a simple car like a Chevy Bolt has plenty of it. And we have one of those in our household now.
So I'm not sure if Amy is still on the line or not, but this is something we have been keeping a very close eye on, and that we've been really interested in from a perspective of our Innovation On-Ramp program. There are some technologies coming along. This technology is up and running in other parts of the world, in Europe and in Japan, but for a variety of permitting and you know, product certification reasons, it just hasn't quite gotten here yet. But completely agree, and actually was going to use the expression killer app, but you beat me to it. yeah, there's a
That's an old expression too, right?
it is,
From us
yeah,
techies from the 90s or something.
from
I
back
don't
in the
remember.
day. But
Yeah.
yeah, there is clearly tremendous opportunity around that, and it's mainly in a vehicle to home or vehicle to building type of context, simpler actually than vehicle to grid, but
Oh,
has
sorry. Right.
Yeah.
So, right. It's the whole notion that the grid is down and I have an inverter, and rather than just plugging in things to the cigarette lighter, I plug in my car into
The house.
my house, and somehow I have a big knife switch that disconnects me from the grid. I take that main breaker and I turn it off and I connect this instead.
Yep.
So
I want one today, Rod. That's all I was asking. You didn't
yeah,
have a model for me yet.
Me too.
All right.
Thank you.
Are there other comments? I think Nancy had the best comment, which was totally blown away. I think that was the way you said it. I mean, this is awesome, and we can't wait for it all to be working. Anything else? Any other final thoughts? I didn't want to cut anybody off. Okay. Thank you guys very much for all that you've done on this. Totally awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And
thanks to the team.
now something with a little bit less flash, but a lot of importance. We're going to talk about the budget framework and timeline.
Okay. Good morning. Can you guys hear me? Because I'm using my phone for audio.
Yep, you sound good, Don.
Oh, great, thank you. All right, good morning. Thank you, Chair and fellow Executive Committee members. This morning we'll do a budget preview. So basically we heard a couple awesome presentations. Now we got to figure out how to pay for it. So we'll cover that in the next couple slides. Next slide, please, Andrea. So this is our roadmap. So today is a budget preview, and we're going to talk about some specific numbers because this coincides with our conversation with Moody's that we're having next week. So we have a pretty good idea of some expectations in the budget process for this year that we feel comfortable to talk about today. But certainly we're going to, in the month of July, Kevin and Don Rhodes are going to meet with staff to actually go through each department's budget and true that up, and then present to the Finance Committee in early August to have that meeting before it goes to the board meeting in August. Then at the board meeting, as we've done in prior years, we'll have a proposed budget for you. We'll receive feedback from the board. We'll incorporate that feedback then with probably another meeting with the Finance Committee or Executive Committee, but we definitely want to meet with a committee before the September board meeting. Get some final feedback. We'll then take that to the board in September for adoption for an October 1 start date. And then moving up to number 6 on the roadmap here. In years past, we've usually updated the strategic plan as the first step in the budget process, and then everything feeds off that. This year, we'll keep the strategic plan as the same, just updated with what we've already accomplished or some other items that we know that we need to do, and then go through a little bit more of a formal process of the strategic plan to be adopted in September, October. And then whatever we get wrong, which we know we will, we'll then take this back to the board in February, March to go through a mid-year budget review. This year we did it in May because we waited for PG&E rates to be released, but normally we'd like to do that in the February, March timeframe. So this just gives you a roadmap over the next 6-7 months of not only adoption of the budget, but the strategic plan, as well as the mid-year budget process. Next slide, please. So let's just review some key assumptions and expectations that we believe the board will see as we present the budget next month. One is going to be trade-offs, going from left to right here. So we're looking at that we always talk about trade-offs and balance between ratepayer value and agency needs. And this year we had a favorable move with PG&E rates actually staying the same. The PCIA landed where we expected it to. We were allowed to keep our 4% discount to PG&E, as well as fund the CRCR and continuing to fund other programs. We'll get into the PCIA in a moment, but we're looking at some challenges next year. We've briefed the board several times on this whopper of a PCIA that's coming. It's certainly not finalized as we speak today, but we know that there's going to be some kind of a true-up. We don't know the exact amount. We don't know the timing, but for this budget process, we'll assume this is going to happen in the next fiscal year. So the board should be prepared if we're looking at a large PCIA increase, if we're looking at some sustained impacts to the economy because of COVID-19, to lower the discount to PG&E to 1%. I don't think there's any flavor from staff or the board to have a discount, to have no discount or even be higher than PG&E. We feel we can sustain a balanced budget with a 1% discount to PG&E, but we want to tee that up today because that will be a theme that you'll hear over the next couple of months as we move towards adoption of the budget, is most likely a need to lower that discount. And that would be consistent to expectations from Moody's as well. Let's move then to PCIA. So we talked about this. We're right now anticipating a whopper of an increase of close to 50% of current PCIA levels. And just keep in mind the PCIA was raised 21% in May. So we're looking then at another 50% increase to that for October, November, December. This would be part of that true up where there's a massive undercollection of the PCIA. Certainly market prices right now where they're at, reduced load is also exacerbating that problem. So we are looking at a large spike in the PCIA for the first quarter of the fiscal year. And then most likely that would come down to about 23% down from the 5-cent level. And that would take us to just about a shade under 4 cents for the PCIA, which is still higher than we have today. And that should take us through 2021. So again, we are most likely going to be off on the timing of this. For instance, one of the cornerstones of the CPUC is affordability. If the economy is really goes into a nosedive, would the CPUC approve such a rate hike in the PCIA? I would doubt it, but for planning purposes, that's what we're assuming today. Retail load. So we talked a lot about this in the mid-year budget. We're expecting about a 10% drop in our load to serve for the rest of this fiscal year. And we have a couple slides following this one, just give you an idea of how we're forecasting load loss due to COVID-19. But we're anticipating that what we're experiencing now, there'll be a slower recovery. It's a conservative view, but it's the right view to take on this. A slower recovery in the economy, which will impact our load loss through the next budget cycle. Next is PG&E rates, another big assumption. So when we presented the budget in May, really up to about 2 months before that, we were also anticipating a 6% drop in PG&E rates. That did not happen. Right now, there's some rumors that from the consultants that there could be a PG&E slight increase this summer. We'll see if that happens. I have not heard from PG&E in our monthly calls with them that that's really going to happen, but I'm not seeing any data out there right now that would be a decrease to PG&E rates. So keep in mind, if there were, and you're looking at a 50% hike in the PCIA, that's a double whammy. But right now, I'm not seeing that threat, either internally or from our consultants, that we're looking at any sort of a PG&E rate decrease. And then lastly, related to COVID-19, bad debt. So SVCE budgets about 0.5% off the top of its revenues into the allowance for doubtful accounts. And then at the end of the year, we true that up with write-offs. What I've seen historically since we launched is write-offs have landed about 0.25%, and that's one of the lowest rates of all CCAs. That's just based on our strong economy of our service territory. What I'm hearing from other CCAs is that they're looking at historical bad debt and they're budgeting 3 to 4 times that number. So East Bay, for instance, this is public information. They're looking at about 0.8% historically. They're taking that number up to about 2.5% for bad debt in their current fiscal year, basically 3 times historical. If we, as the summer unfolds and we have data to support a change in our bad debt, we should probably look at 3 to 4 times our historical, which would take us to about 1%. Still one of the lowest of all CCAs. So these are key assumptions, obviously subject to change, but these are the drivers behind our talks with Moody's, and it's the drivers behind the numbers that you'll see in a moment. Next slide, please. So we talked about load drop from COVID-19. So we looked at a few scenarios. We feel the scenario that is consistent to what we'll present with Moody's is what we call a W-shaped recovery. And it's a conservative view. And basically saying that instead of the economy, we get through COVID-19, the economy gets back to normal on October 1st. We're taking a little bit more of a cautious view and saying that there'll probably be another resurgence in COVID-19 in the winter. And there could be then a second drop, maybe not as severe, but a second drop in commercial and industrial load. And then there would be a second recovery period. But we would probably anticipate that with the length of this COVID-19 and shelter in place and just the change in workplace and working virtually from home, that there'll probably be some longer term impacts to load, especially on the C&I side. And the next slide will put some numbers behind the graph that you see there to the right. Next slide, please. So this is the scenarios that we're looking at for the mid-case. Keep in mind our fiscal year starts October 1. So really it would be, and I'm not going to read all these numbers to you, but we would start the fiscal year probably with an overall drop in load of about 5%. And then starting in December, that would get lower to about 3%. Then May and June next year, still in this budget cycle, be a slight resurgence up to 4%. And then ultimately we'll land at about a 3% in end of the fiscal year. And then in 2022, we feel our new normal would be a 2% drop in load just for COVID-19. Now there may be other adjustments to load based on new accounts, et cetera, but that's what we feel from a long-term load forecasting view. Next slide. So here's our financial summary. This is consistent to what we will be presenting to Moody's next week. Again, Kevin and Don have not met with staff yet in creating the budget, so these numbers are very much likely to change, but this gives you a pretty good idea of what to expect. So our operating revenues, 1% discount. We're figuring into next year's budget, 1% discount to PG&E. We're assuming no change to PG&E rates. We talked about the PCIA, and with the load reduction, normally would be about 3,900 gigawatt hours to load to serve. We're probably figuring about 3,700. This year's budget, the budget we just passed last May, we had about 290 million of revenues. Right now we're looking at 265 million. So we're looking right off the top, 25 million drop in revenues with the PCIA. Power supply, 237 right now is our number for this year's budget. We probably want to move that up to about 241 for next year. That includes about 3% contingency. We'll be significantly hedged, so a lot of that risk will be eliminated on power supply. And right now, any unhedged positions, really due to the economy, we're having some good pricing to be able to fill those positions. So I see power supply remaining relatively flat. That then takes us to operating margin. Just to give you some historical reference, going back to 2017, 18, and 19, our operating margin was 37%, 24%, 26%. We'll probably end this year closer to 20%. So this would be one of the tightest margins in the budget that we've ever presented to the board. But that 24 million needs to cover our CapEx, our programs, our operating expenses, and our non-operating expenses. So let's then subtract out other operating and non-operating. So that 19.2 million is net of our anticipated investment income of about $1.5 million. So that means that our operating expenses in total would be about 20.7 million, which means our current budget is close to about 21 million. So we would look to keep our other operating expenses flat. And then that leaves us a balance for reserves of about 5.3 million. So we believe if these scenarios come true on the assumptions, keeping that 1% discount to PG&E, keeping our other operating expenses flat, hedging our power supply, we should have a budget to present to the board that is balanced and would not be dipping into reserves, but would be, in all intents and purposes, flat. Next slide. So this would be our projected reserves. So fiscal year 19A, starting from left to right with the green bars, 19A means actuals. So we ended last year close to the target. This year, even though we've had some challenges with the shelter in place and the PCIA, we still should be able to add cash, and we went through that conversation in the budget presentation last month, and we should be at the upper end of our reserves target at the end of this year. So we're going into a challenging year next year at our reserves target. I think that's a great story, and the board should be proud of themselves for managing our budget that way. And then going into fiscal year 21 estimate in 22 and 23, you can see nearly flat for 21, 22 as we're dealing with the PCIA. But as the PCIA starts to drop off, or we hope anyway, certainly the numbers improve, and we would anticipate that as the PCIA comes down, that we would restore that discount to PG&E back to at least 4%. So the story on this budget would be that we would at least maintain our cash position to our target. Next slide. So in summary, the board, as you review the budget, whether it's proposed or voting on the adopted budget, anticipate a budget next year that's going to be a tight margin, and it will put pressure on all of us to maintain expenses. The two biggest risks I see in this budget for next year is going to be the PCIA, both in timing and in impact, and then of course the economy. I think we've taken a conservative approach in our anticipated load impact from COVID-19, but time will tell. And again, the reserves are there if needed. So that concludes my presentation. Happy to take any questions.
Sure, there'll probably be a few questions. First, Don, I want to just make a couple comments, right? I am very grateful that we always take a very conservative approach, or even downright pessimistic at times in how we go about our budget, because you never want to be on the wrong side. And that's been a tradition in history. And I want to thank you for that for all these years. And when we find a permanent replacement, I am hopeful they will be equally conservative and even pessimistic, if that's the right word. And then on the discount, everybody knows, and I just want to reiterate, right? While we would all love to give free electricity to the world, right, that's carbon free, the reality is we're in a business, and I don't think there's ever been any reticence on the part of the board to not change our discount to make sure that we're a viable entity. That it's not even a question, right? We go through the whole process. We actually look at all the numbers that are coming in, and we balance the finances of the business versus what we're charging the customers. And that's how we set the discount at the end. So I'm perfectly comfortable with with planning for 1%. If the world is better, maybe we do better for our customers. If the world is not better, we are not afraid to touch that discount. And that's been our history too. So I just wanted to make sure we just mentioned that. And on the reserves, there's the target in the middle, but it's a big range. And we've been in the range for a couple years on the low side. And this year we will actually be right down the middle of it. So I'm super grateful. And all the budget stuff you mentioned, Don, does not include touching those reserves. In fact, we're still adding to the reserves in what is arguably the worst year that we're going to face for some time to come. So those are my quickie comments. Does anybody have any questions? I have a member of the public. Let's go there, and then I'll come back to us. So Bruce?
Yes, thanks for the opportunity to speak again. Two topics. One is, I hope Don can remind me and the executive committee whether it's in early 2021 or early 2022 when the expansion of direct access happens. If it's as early as next January, then that too would be a concern, as there's potential out-migration of customers to new direct access contracts. The other thing I wanted to mention is I have a vague memory of how the PCIA is set. And I could be wrong, but let me tell you how I think it is, because it might impact the increases in the PCIA that residential in particular see. So what I remember hearing is that PG&E looks at the 100 hours out of the year with the highest demand, which are typically late afternoon, early evening, summer hours, and decides how much of the energy during those 100 hours is being consumed by different rate classes. So you can imagine that in the rate class of street lighting, almost none of those hours are summer, early evening, late afternoon. And so that the street lighting rate has virtually zero PCIA, whereas businesses and residences have quite a bit. And it seems to me that given the COVID change, residential customers who are at home running their residential air conditioning, if they're lucky enough to have it, will be using a greater fraction of the electricity in those 100 hours than they previously did, which would imply an even larger jump in PCIA for residential and a lower PCIA increase for commercial and industrial. Now, I don't know if that really matters a lot, given that the flexible policy that you're adopting says we're going to keep rates 1% below PG&E's across all rate classes, no matter what. But I think the Finance Administrative Committee might benefit from a deeper understanding of exactly how the PCIA is set across rate classes. And those are my comments for today. Thanks very much.
Oops. Thank you, Bruce. And Nancy, do you want to lead us off?
Yeah, well, thanks for the overview, Don. I had some questions about the, I guess I get, let's see, I don't know the slide number. I guess it's, I don't see the slide numbers, but it's basically the W recovery curve and then the following slide, the scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start with the scenarios first. So these are the average changes based on observation, or are these projections? I see. So the first line is observation and the second lines are forecast.
Well, the first line, the shelter in place, for instance, March 17th to May 30th, we have actuals for those months, and that is exactly where we're at right now. It's about we're right now currently in June about 8% drop in overall load. As we get start looking at recovery period number 1 and moving forward, those are projections, and that's just looking at historical data, talking to other CCAs, running some modeling through Ascend Analytics, and taking a conservative view on this is the inputs for these recommendations.
Okay, so the if you go back to the previous slide, the W-shaped recovery curve is from the analysts' projections.
Actually, that curve was from I think the Brookings Institute, but that curve itself. But that was the basis for coming up with a we'll have a recovery and then anticipate another surge in COVID-19 and have a downside to the economy for a little while and then have another recovery again, ultimately landing in a place that's going to be maybe a 2% permanent drop in load compared to what we had pre-COVID-19.
So can I ask what's the time horizon for this approximately?
So if you go back to the slide right after this, Andrea, yeah. So this would be so when we say new normal, phase 2, at the bottom of the graph table, we feel like there's going to be this W-shaped recovery is really going from now until we get to the new normal of 2022.
Okay, fiscal year 2022. Okay, or calendar year.
Calendar year 2022. Yes.
Okay, calendar year. Okay. Okay, and so then do you have any insights about why the small, medium CNI customers are expected to be more impacted than the large CNI customers in terms of load?
Yeah, I would invite Don Bray because you're more close with the customer side to answer that, but I can also answer if needed.
So, yeah, what we've seen to date has been more significant percentage-wise load loss in the small and medium business segment, and it's a function of the buildings that they occupy, and I think how their businesses have been impacted. Large office buildings really have to continue to operate. They're big, living, breathing things. So even if there aren't many employees inside of a building like that, it needs to be ventilated and operated. It's easier in a small office to turn off the light switch and turn the thermostat down and not have that building or that portion of a building that you might be leasing consuming energy. So I think it's reflective of the physical characteristics of the space, one, and then two, probably the nature of the businesses involved.
Okay, and then my last question is, so in terms of this W recovery curve, we haven't necessarily hit the bottom of the first dip.
Just, when I'm looking at actuals, I think for at least this summer anyway, I think somewhere landing in that 7 to 8% load is probably the bottom of what we'll see for, and when I say 8%, that's weighted average over all the rate classes. So I think we're kind of right there now. And when I look back at April and May, we saw about a 10% drop in load. Right now through June, it's now improving to about 7 to 8%, which is what we reference in this presentation. Recently there was just an announcement with the county on certain sectors of the economy in the county that are going to be allowed to reopen. So that's a promising sign that hopefully we are bottoming out.
Okay, I appreciate your taking me through that. And that's the only questions I have at the moment.
Girish, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, maybe it's just emphasizing what Don was saying in answer to Nancy's last question. I think we are at the bottom of that first part of the W. We are seeing some of the small CNI load coming back, and with Santa Clara County kind of opening up, I think there's just adaptation happening. right? So people are going back to work with a lot more adaptation, and I think with a lot more testing capacity, I think the economy will come back. But I'd say overall, the W is definitely a guess for us. But I think if you look at the cumulative impact over a 2-year period, I think we're pretty good. You know, the actual periods of that table, that's really a guess for us. Thank you.
Liz?
So I think Girish just answered my question. I'm not as optimistic as I'm very much pessimistic that things are going to stay bad for a while. Margaret, you're smiling. I'm just wondering. I think, as always, the presentation is excellent. I really appreciate the context between past years and future years. There's an ability to understand what you're doing and why you're making these assumptions. Do we have a downside scenario?
This what we call mid case was really our downside scenario as far as where we think this is going to land. I don't have right now a scenario where we are looking at a further drop in load. But right now, what we presented, probably what we call mid case, is really our worst case.
If I may add to that. Yeah. So, I mean, we are going into uncharted territory, but I think, you know, the day-to-day changes. You know, you're reading the newspapers about what's happening in New Jersey and Texas and different states. And I think there are two things happening, right? It's the coronavirus and the impacts on us as human beings. And then what are we doing with the economy? I think the more we learn, both, we are adapting to both. So I think there will be, I think we are at the bottom. However, we don't know. We've never been in a situation like this before. I think this goes back to the recommendation that we have, and that's why we wanted to bring it up to the exec committee today. When you have adequate reserves, you have the ability to work a variety of different options. The fact you set aside not just $10 million, it's the most of any CCA for CRCR solutions, and a $2 million contingency on that too. If we didn't have this kind of conservative outlook, we would never have had this opportunity to be able to respond. So similarly, I think the takeaway of this presentation is, from a board policy standpoint, is getting to that 1% discount starting with the next budget year. And that, from a policy standpoint, I mean, you're definitely going to struggle with that, because when you have a lot of unemployment, how do you change the discount, right? And this is the point that Howard made also. But to the extent you do, you can actually absorb worst cases that we are not anticipating right now.
And Girish, I just got to point out, we didn't build a reserve just to have a number in the bank. We built a reserve that if the world shifted from under us, we could weather a bad situation and still be a viable entity. And everything that Don's just presented, we are still adding money to that reserve. We're not even drawing the reserve. So to Liz's point, maybe this is more optimistic than we think. Even if this thing went even worse, we have the ability as an organization to weather this. No question in my mind at all. We could have a quadruple, double W, whatever it would be. And with what we've done with the reserves and our financial policies, we could tap the reserves if we had to. And we're not even near that, even with this negative case.
Right, and if I may, so I think that point is not lost on me. My comment was really kind of a gut comment that I think other board members share when you bring this forward. And I think having part of the presentation include that perspective, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, for sure, Liz. And I think by the time we get to August, we'll have more observational data that we'll be able to look at the W in maybe a different manner.
Yeah, and we sound really sad about having a 20% operating margin. Like that is a woe is me. You know, I will tell you the small businesses and restaurants in my city are at negative 80% margins right now. I mean, being at 20%, yahoo, we're doing good. Even under bad situations, we're very viable. And I think that matters a lot.
And I forget we're planning so far ahead prudently.
Okay, I got distracted. I am sorry. Was there other comments that anybody wanted to make or questions that need to be asked? So let me just thank Don. You know, I don't know how many more opportunities we'll get to thank you because the days are ticking, but thank you very much for all that you have done for us since the very, very beginning of our CCA. And we do wish you well, starting up a new CCA here in California, which is all good for us and the state. We're going to miss you, but thank you for putting us on such solid ground before you leave.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, fellow board members.
Okay, just to be sure, any other comments or discussion on budget? We're seeing none, so we're going to move along. Committee or staff remarks? Nancy, if you want to say something?
Yeah, I just heard some good news that our very own Kaushik Toda got a recognition for his project with the Silicon Valley Clean Energy. I don't know if Girish was going to say anything about that, but there is a website where the winners have been announced, and participants can go sign in and vote and say nice things about it. And I would advise staff and council, staff and commissioners, executive committee members to go support Kaushik and the Climate Youth Ambassador Program. So I will provide that link to staff, and they can, you know, announce it. I wrote him a recommendation letter and am happy to report that he did get the award. So it's, I think he's going to get $1,000 for the Climate Youth Ambassador Program.
Okay.
So
Excellent.
go Sunnyvale. Whee!
Yes. Any other announcements? Margaret?
I haven't said anything all morning, but we recently approved our first all-electric residential development, and then on Tuesday we approved a Google project that will be all-electric. So these are under our new REACH codes.
Congratulations. Good job with that. Okay, so I have just a quick one, just so remind everybody we are in the process of Girish's review. So additional stuff will come out, and we have to wrap this all up, you know, at the end of summer. So there's a bunch of stuff that happens between here and now. And Nancy and Margaret, you guys are on the hook in a much bigger way. So just a reminder announcement. Anybody have anything else? Seeing none, then I
was just going to say,
Liz,
welcome
please.
back to Pamela. Yay, Pamela.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Yeah. Back at home, but you're back. So this is good.
It's an interesting time to be back, but yes.
Excellent. Okay. Anything else? Seeing nothing, then I think we're going to go. We're going to be adjourned. So thank you, everybody, for being here today.